The restaurant was quieter than usual that evening. Soft lights hung low over polished tables, casting a warm glow over the floor. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos, but inside it felt like a small, contained world. The waitress moved carefully between tables, her tray balanced with practiced ease, carrying dishes that smelled rich and comforting. She smiled at her customers, taking orders with a calm, friendly tone, though her mind wandered as she walked back and forth. Each step was familiar, almost automatic, like the rhythm of a well-rehearsed song. She had worked here for a few years, learning the routines and the unspoken rules of the place. Some tables were easier than others, regulars who didn't need much attention and tipped well, while others demanded constant attention, asking for modifications and special requests. Tonight, she was tired. Her feet ached from standing for hours, and her hands carried the faint scent of herbs and sauce from the kitchen. Still, she kept her head high, moving with the quiet grace of someone who had learned how to disappear into the background while still being present. The piano in the corner of the room caught her eye more than once. It was an old instrument, polished but unused, sitting near a wall lined with bookshelves and small art pieces. She had always loved music. As a child, she had spent hours at the piano, her fingers running over the keys and patterns she learned from teachers who had once believed she had a rare talent. Music had been her escape, her solace. But life had pulled her away from that world, and now the piano was just part of the restaurant's decor. Sometimes, late at night, she would imagine the notes filling the room, the kind of melodies that made people stop and listen, completely unaware of everything else around them. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a group at one of the central tables. They entered with a quiet authority, the kind of presence that made the other diners glance up briefly. The man at the center wore an expensive suit, not flashy, but clearly high quality. His companions followed closely, and the waitress noticed the subtle attention the staff gave them. It was not just respect, but a cautious acknowledgement that some people moved differently in the world. The world around them adjusted automatically. She took a deep breath and approached their table, her practiced smile in place. "Good evening." "Welcome," she said, handing them the menus with a light tap of her fingertips. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man at the center looked up at her and smiled faintly. There was a calm, almost measuring quality to the way he observed her, and for a moment, she felt a tiny ripple of unease. He ordered with simple efficiency, his companions following suit. There was no small talk, just the quiet rhythm of the evening settling in. She nodded and walked away, making a mental note of the drinks and scanning the room for other tables that needed attention. As she moved back to the service station, she overheard snippets of conversation from the central table. They spoke in low tones about business deals, investments, and opportunities. Words that felt distant and abstract, almost like another language. She carried the drinks back carefully, setting them down with polite precision. The man looked at her and said, almost casually, "Thank you." "You look like someone who appreciates art," she blinked, unsure if he meant her uniform or something else. "I do," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. She had learned that conversations with certain people required balance, friendly, but not too familiar. Polite but not overstepping. He smiled again, this time with a hint of curiosity. "Do you play music?" he asked. The question was casual, almost offhand, but something in the way he said it suggested he expected an honest answer. She hesitated, her fingers brushing against the tray as she adjusted it. For a moment she considered deflecting, pretending ignorance. But something in his gaze made her pause. There was no judgment, no challenge, just simple curiosity. "I used to," she said softly. "I haven't played in a long time," he nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine it's like riding a bike. You never forget completely." The words lingered in her mind as she moved to other tables, refilling water glasses and clearing empty plates. She caught herself glancing at the piano more than once, imagining the feel of the keys under her fingers. The familiar weight and resistance, the way each note seemed to tell a story. She had not played in years, not since life had demanded her attention in other directions. Yet the memory of the music was vivid, alive in her mind like a dormant flame. The restaurant continued its evening rhythm. with soft conversations, clinking cutlery, and the occasional laugh from a distant table. She moved like a shadow, efficient and unobtrusive, yet always aware of the space around her. There was satisfaction in the work, yes, but also a subtle ache, a longing for something lost. She wondered, not for the first time, if the path she had chosen or been forced onto was really hers. The man and his companions finished their drinks, and she noticed the subtle signals they sent to each other, the nods and glances that communicated without words. She felt a shift in the air as they settled their check. Then, as if the moment had been waiting, the man leaned slightly forward. "Resting his elbows on the table, you know? That piano over there," he said, nodding toward the corner. "It's a shame it doesn't get played more often. It looks like it belongs in a concert hall rather than a restaurant." She felt her stomach tighten. The piano had been nothing more than decoration in her mind for years, a reminder of a life she no longer led. But now, with his words, it seemed to call to her, to stir the memories she had tried to keep tucked away. "I suppose so," she said quietly. She didn't move, afraid to admit the truth even to herself, that she could play. And perhaps, just perhaps, she still remembered enough to make the keys sing. He smiled, a small knowing smile. "Do you play?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment the noise of the restaurant faded. She felt her heart beat a little faster, the muscles in her fingers tensing as if remembering some long-lost routine. There was hesitation, doubt, and a flicker of fear. What if she failed? What if the sound she remembered was just a memory and not real anymore? Yet beneath the fear, there was also a spark, a sense of possibility that made her breathe a little deeper. "I can," she admitted softly. "I haven't in a while." The man nodded, not pushing further. But his expression was one of quiet anticipation, a gentle challenge without words. He turned to his companions and said something that she didn't catch, then returned his attention to her. She moved to refill a glass of water, her mind racing with thoughts and memories. The piano seemed to beckon her, the polished keys gleaming under the soft light. Whispering the songs she had once played and loved, she finished her task and returned to the service station. Glancing again at the corner where the piano sat, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath around her. A feeling of something extraordinary waiting, just beyond reach, made her chest tighten. She was aware of every movement, every sound, every faint echo of memory that passed through her mind. The music was still there, alive under her skin, waiting for her to let it out. As the evening progressed, she continued her duties, but the thought of the piano never left her. She imagined lifting the cover, feeling the cool keys under her fingers, the way the sound would resonate in the room. She felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement, pull toward something she had almost forgotten. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as the night went on, casting longer shadows over the tables. The regular hum of conversation became quieter, and the occasional laugh or clink of a glass felt distant. She moved with careful steps, attentive to every table, but her mind kept returning to the piano. The man at the central table had finished his meal, and his companions were engaged in quiet conversation. He watched her for a moment, his eyes reflecting interest in something else she could not name. She felt a subtle connection, not spoken but understood, a sense that this one night might be different, that something beyond the ordinary was waiting. By the time she cleared the last of the evening's orders, she found herself standing near the piano. Her fingers twitched almost involuntarily, as if remembering a long-forgotten language. She inhaled deeply, the scent of the restaurant and the faint polish of the piano mixing into a strange, comforting blend. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and excitement. No one said anything. The restaurant continued its quiet rhythm, and she felt the strange, powerful sensation of possibility. For the first time in years, she imagined herself playing again, imagining the music flowing through the room, touching everyone present. And though she did not move toward the piano yet, the thought alone sent a thrill through her, a quiet whisper that the world could change in a single moment. The first part of the night ended not with action, but with anticipation. The waitress returned to her duties, but the presence of the piano and the subtle curiosity of the man in the central table lingered in her mind. The air seemed charged, waiting for something to happen, a story about to unfold. She moved among the tables with her usual grace. Yet her thoughts kept circling back to the piano, to the music, and to the strange sense that tonight might be different from any other evening she had ever worked. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm when the man from the central table leaned slightly forward, resting his arms on the polished surface of the table. The soft light above him caught the edge of his suit jacket and reflected a calm confidence that made people notice without demanding attention. His companions chatted in low tones about plans and schedules, but his focus remained on the waitress. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of curiosity and calm authority, that made her pause for just a moment. She approached his table with a gentle smile, balancing the empty glasses on her tray. Her mind raced with a mixture of curiosity and unease. She had always been careful in her interactions, careful not to overstep, careful not to make assumptions. And yet, there was something about this man, about the way he spoke and observed, that made her feel seen in a way that was unfamiliar and unexpected. "Excuse me," he said in a calm, even voice. "I noticed the piano over there. Do you ever play?" She paused, a faint warmth rising to her cheeks. The question was simple, almost casual, but it carried a weight she hadn't expected. The piano had been a part of her life long ago, a companion in quiet moments and in dreams she had almost forgotten. Now it seemed to be calling her again. I used to," she said softly. "I haven't in a long time." He nodded as if he understood something she had not yet acknowledged herself. "I imagine you never really forget," he said. "Even if you haven't played in years, the music remains. It's part of you." His words made her stop for a moment. She glanced toward the piano, the polished keys gleaming under the soft restaurant lights. Memories surfaced long afternoons spent practicing, the weight of expectation, joy and frustration, the feeling of losing herself in the music until nothing else existed. She could almost hear the notes in her mind, simple at first, but building into melodies she had once mastered. The thought made her fingers itch to move. The man leaned back slightly, his expression gentle but insistent. "Would you like to try?" Her heart skipped a beat. Try here. In front of everyone? She could feel the warmth rising in her cheeks and the slight tremor in her hands. There were so many reasons to say no. What if she failed? What if it sounded wrong, clumsy, awkward? What if people laughed, or worse, ignored her entirely? And yet, there was a spark, a pull she hadn't felt in years. Urging her forward, she swallowed hard and nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips. "I can," she said quietly, almost to herself. The man's eyes lit with quiet approval, and he leaned slightly forward again. "Good," he said. "I'd love to hear what you can do." She excused herself from the table and made her way to the piano, each step measured and careful. She could feel the eyes of a few diners on her, though most seemed absorbed in their own conversations. Still, the presence of others added weight to each movement, a subtle pressure that made her heart beat faster. She lifted the cover and let her fingers hover above the keys. The cool surface felt familiar, welcoming, and a little intimidating all at once. For a moment, she just sat there, breathing in slowly, letting her hands remember the position of each key. Her mind drifted to the pieces she had once played, the ones that had brought her joy, the ones that had been a challenge, and the ones she had abandoned before finishing. She remembered the rhythm, the flow, the subtle nuances that made music alive. The first note she played was soft, almost hesitant. It was a simple chord, but it sounded clean and intentional. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling the familiar thrill of sound under her fingers. The notes were cautious at first, but as she moved into the melody, they began to flow more freely. The hesitation melted into a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of practice, muscle memory, and instinct. She could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. Conversations became softer, footsteps seemed quieter, and the soft hum of background activity faded. People looked up, drawn by the sound that was more than music. It was emotion, memory, and talent intertwined. The man at the central table watched closely, his expression calm but intensely focused, as if he were witnessing something rare and valuable. Her hands moved across the keys with a fluidity she had thought lost, each note deliberate, yet full of feeling. She chose a piece she had played countless times in her youth, one that carried both technical challenge and emotional depth. The notes seemed to awaken something in her, a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. She forgot the tiredness in her legs, the ache in her back, the fact that she was still a waitress in a restaurant rather than a performer on stage. All that mattered was the music, the way it resonated in the room. In her heart, and unexpectedly in the hearts of those listening, the diners around her were quiet, some leaning slightly in their seats, others simply watching, caught in a spell they did not fully understand. The music was not loud or overpowering, but it had a presence, a way of filling the space and holding attention without demanding it. She felt a connection with everyone in the room, a shared understanding through sound. As the song progressed, she allowed herself to take small risks, adding flourishes and subtle dynamics that she remembered from her training. Her fingers danced over the keys with confidence, and the piano seemed to respond to her touch, producing rich, resonant tones that filled the restaurant. The man at the central table leaned slightly forward, his eyes never leaving hers, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He did not speak, but his presence was grounding, a quiet encouragement that gave her courage. For a moment, she forgot where she was. There was no restaurant, no diners, no responsibilities. There was only the music and the way it moved through her, the way it seemed to carry emotion and memory with every note. She felt a sense of liberation, as if years of unspoken longing and quiet regret were flowing out of her through her fingertips. The song reached its climax, a series of complex chords and rapid runs that tested her skills and concentration. She played with precision, letting the rhythm and melody guide her, trusting in the years of practice that had become part of her very being. When the final note faded, the room was silent for a brief, suspended moment. The last sound lingered in the air like a gentle echo, leaving a sense of completion and fulfillment. Then, slowly the restaurant responded. A few diners clapped quietly at first, then more joined in, until the room was filled with soft applause. Some were smiling, some were visibly moved, and a few had tears in their eyes. She allowed herself a small, shy smile, feeling the warmth of their appreciation. It was a strange mix of pride and humility, a recognition that what she had shared was more than just music. It was a part of herself. The man at the central table rose slightly, his hands together in a polite but unmistakable gesture of respect. He nodded at her, his smile now broader, filled with admiration. She felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and, in doing so, had touched the lives of those around her. She returned to her duties, her heart still racing, a quiet joy bubbling beneath her composed exterior. The piano had been a bridge between who she was and who she had been, a reminder that talent and passion, even when dormant, never truly fade. The man at the central table spoke softly to his companions, his attention still lingering on her, and she felt the subtle acknowledgement of someone who recognized greatness when it appeared. Unexpectedly, the rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity, but she carried a new sense of purpose with her. The simple act of playing, of embracing her gift, had transformed the ordinary into something memorable, something alive. She moved among the tables with renewed energy, her steps lighter, her smile more genuine. Every glance at the piano reminded her that this moment was not an end, but a beginning. A quiet turning point in a life that had been waiting for a spark to reignite the music within her. The moment the final note of her first song faded, a hush settled over the restaurant. It was not just polite silence, it was the kind of quiet that spoke of attention, of awe, of something rare and unexpected. The waitress returned to her station, feeling the residual energy of the music still coursing through her fingers. She could feel the eyes of the central table on her, the man at the head observing her with quiet interest, as if waiting to see what she might do next. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The first piece had been careful, a gentle reintroduction to the world she had left behind. Now there was a choice to be made, to stop here and return to her duties, or to let the music rise further, to give herself fully to the moment. Something deep inside nudged her toward the latter. She could feel the spark of excitement, the sense that this was more than a performance. It was an opportunity, a reconnection with a part of herself she had almost forgotten. As she moved toward the piano again, she noticed the subtle shifts around the room. Diners who had been absorbed in their meals now paused, some turning slightly in their seats to catch a glimpse of the woman who had captured the atmosphere with nothing more than her touch on the keys. The soft clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation faded further into the background, replaced by an almost palpable anticipation. Her fingers hovered above the keys, feeling the familiar texture, the weight, and the resistance that had once been a part of her daily life. She allowed her mind to wander briefly, recalling the practice sessions of her youth, the discipline, the frustrations, the triumphs. And then, with a quiet exhale, she began again, letting the first notes emerge confidently. The second piece was different. It was richer, more layered, with a depth of emotion that was raw and personal. Each chord carried a weight of memory, of struggle, and of hope. The melody unfolded gradually, slowly building in intensity, drawing the listeners in. Her hands moved fluidly, almost as if guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. Letting the music shape itself through her fingers, she could feel the tension in the room. The subtle shifts in posture, the gentle leaning forward of heads, the quiet attention that was both respectful and captivated. The man at the central table watched intently, his eyes reflecting both admiration and curiosity, as if he were witnessing not just a performance, but a revelation. There was no pomp, no showmanship, just the honesty of skill and the emotional resonance that came from someone playing not for recognition, but because it was part of who they were. The melody began to swell, filling the space between the tables, weaving through the conversations, threading itself into the very air. It was a delicate balance of precision and feeling of discipline and freedom. She felt herself moving with it, her body subtly swaying, her expression focused yet serene. Each note connected with the next, each pause and each emphasis carrying intention. She allowed herself to remember the pieces she had composed as a young musician. Fragments of music that had never seen the light of performance. She incorporated them subtly, weaving personal touches into the familiar structure of the piece. The result was something unique, something that felt alive. That seemed to resonate with the listeners in a way that transcended mere sound. She glanced briefly at the diners, seeing reactions she hadn't expected. A young couple at a nearby table had stopped their conversation entirely, their hands resting on the table as their eyes followed her movements. A small child peeked from behind a parent, fascinated by the way her fingers moved so quickly yet with grace. Even the staff in the kitchen paused momentarily, listening. Caught by the sincerity and skill that radiated from the piano, her heart raced, not from fear, but from exhilaration. This was a performance unlike any other, not because of the audience, but because of what it represented for her. She was reclaiming a part of herself, embracing something she had almost abandoned. The energy in the room fueled her further, each note feeling alive and responsive. A dialogue between her and the space around her. The man at the central table shifted slightly, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, his gaze steady and encouraging. There was no pressure, no expectation, beyond simply witnessing her gift. And yet, somehow, the weight of his attention added to the gravity of the moment, grounding her, urging her to continue with even greater confidence. As the piece reached its midpoint, the complexity increased. Rapid sequences of notes flowed effortlessly from her fingers, each transition smooth and intentional. She felt a rush of adrenaline, a sense of mastery returning. The culmination of years of training and practice resurfacing in full force. The melody was both intricate and emotive, carrying a story within its progressions. It's an unspoken narrative that only music could convey. The audience seemed to sense this shift. Eyes widened slightly, heads tilted, and an air of awe settled more firmly. The restaurant had become a theater, the piano, a vessel of expression that drew every listener into its orbit. Even the staff, who had seen many performances and events within these walls, were quietly captivated, pausing in their work to catch glimpses of the music unfolding. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music flow entirely from instinct and emotion. Trusting her memory, trusting her fingers, the notes became a conversation, a journey, each chord a sentence, each pause a breath. She felt the story taking shape, a narrative of resilience, longing, and rediscovery. Every sound carried intention, not for applause or recognition, but simply because it was part of her. Reflection of a life paused and now returned. Time seemed to stretch and contract around the music. What had been minutes felt like moments, and yet each note lingered in the air, resonating far beyond its physical sound. She could sense the subtle reactions of the listeners, the soft inhalation of breath, the tilt of a head, the quiet smile of recognition when a particularly emotive sequence touched something personal in them. The climax approached. A series of rapid, precise runs followed by deep, resonant chords that demanded attention. She felt her pulse quicken, her body moving almost unconsciously with the rhythm and flow. The music was no longer just a performance. It was an embodiment of experience, of emotion, memory, and potential, all converging. Finally, she allowed the final notes to ring out, holding each one long enough for its resonance to fill the room. Then, with a gentle lift of her hands, the sound faded into silence, leaving behind a profound stillness. The moment hung there, suspended, as if the room itself was catching its breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then, slowly, the restaurant responded. Quiet murmurs began to ripple through the tables, soft applause growing gradually. Some diners were visibly moved, others smiling with admiration, a few with eyes glistening from the emotion carried by the music. The waitress lowered her hands, a humble smile touching her lips, feeling both relief and a deep satisfaction. The man at the central table nodded appreciatively, rising slightly from his seat. His smile was wide now, a mixture of respect and quiet awe. He spoke softly to his companions, gesturing toward her, acknowledging the rare talent they had just witnessed. She felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet recognition that she had not just performed but shared a piece of herself, allowing the room to experience it alongside her. Returning to her station, she moved with a newfound confidence. The rest of the evening continued, yet the energy in the restaurant was different now. The music had transformed the space, left a mark that would linger, a memory that diners would carry with them. She felt lighter, more present, her steps purposeful. Her interactions with others tinged with the quiet joy of having reclaimed something important. The piano now seemed less like an object, and more like a companion, a reminder of her abilities and the possibilities that lay ahead. She glanced at it periodically, feeling a quiet anticipation for the next opportunity, the next piece, the next moment when she could let the music flow through her again. The night stretched on, yet every moment was infused with the lingering presence of her performance. Each clink of cutlery, each soft word of conversation, each step across the polished floor seemed quieter, more deliberate, as though the restaurant itself had been transformed by the resonance of music and emotion, and somewhere deep inside her, she knew that this was not merely a fleeting moment, but a turning point, the beginning of a path that had been waiting patiently for her to return to it. The waitress took a deep breath, her hands hovering above the keys once more. The last piece had been strong, confident, and expressive. But she knew there was one more she could play, a piece that had lived in the deepest corners of her memory for years. It was not a song of technical skill alone, but one that carried the weight of her past, of choices, of sacrifices, of dreams she had set aside. She had never played it for anyone, not even in her youth, not in recitals or competitions. It was personal, intimate, and fragile. Yet she felt that tonight could be shared. The restaurant was quieter than ever now. Conversations had dwindled, the hum of activity soft and cautious, as if the space itself had become aware of the music yet to come. Diners glanced toward her, some leaning forward slightly in their chairs, sensing something was about to happen. The man at the central table sat with calm anticipation, his eyes fixed on her. There was no rush, no demand, just a patient invitation to let the music speak. Her fingers touched the keys, light and tentative at first. The notes began softly, delicate and uncertain, almost as if testing the waters. She allowed herself to remember, to feel, to let the music guide her rather than commanding it. The first melody unfolded slowly, each note carrying emotion she had tucked away for years. There was a vulnerability to it, an honesty that made her chest tighten and her eyes mist slightly. She played with intent, each chord and sequence deliberate, yet natural, flowing like a conversation with herself and with anyone listening. The notes echoed in the room, and she could feel them connecting with the audience in a subtle, unspoken way. Some diners leaned in, the soft clatter of utensils fading into the background, replaced by the raw presence of music and emotion. Even the staff seemed to pause, drawn in by the authenticity of the moment as the song developed. It began to grow richer, deeper, and more complex. She allowed herself to take small risks, to explore the spaces between notes, to use silence as part of the narrative. Each chord resonated with intention, carrying both pain and beauty, the struggles she had faced and the resilience she had discovered in herself. The melody was no longer just sound. It was a story, unspoken yet understood. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, weaving patterns that had lived in her memory for years. The music seemed to swell naturally, lifting the atmosphere, filling the room with emotion that could be felt as much as heard. The diners were captivated, their eyes fixed on her hands, their ears attuned to every nuance. She could see reactions, subtle and profound, and it encouraged her to continue, to let the song unfold fully. Without restraint, the central table remained still, the man watching quietly, his gaze calm but intense. There was no judgment in his eyes, only appreciation, recognition, and an understanding of the courage it took to share something so personal. The energy in the room was quiet yet potent, a mix of anticipation, admiration, and empathy. She moved into the midsection of the piece, where the melodies intertwined, creating layers of sound that carried a depth of feeling. The music became a bridge, connecting her past and present, her experiences and emotions, and the listeners in the room. Some diners were visibly moved, their expressions softening, their attention completely absorbed. The child at the nearby table watched in wonder, while a couple held hands gently. Caught in the shared experience of something extraordinary, her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her posture relaxed but focused. She allowed herself to feel the music fully, to let it guide her expression, her breathing, her movement. Every note was intentional, a reflection of her soul, a moment of vulnerability she had chosen to share. The energy in the room responded, subtle but powerful, as if the music itself had a presence, a life beyond her hands. As she approached the climax, the complexity of the song increased. Rapid sequences of notes, layered chords, and shifting rhythms tested her focus, yet she moved with grace and precision. Her mind was fully present, yet free, letting muscle memory and instinct take over. She felt exhilaration building, a mixture of nervousness and joy, knowing that she was playing something extraordinary and intimate. For an audience that could truly feel it, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Conversations had completely ceased, and even the faint background noise had diminished. Every ear, every glance, every subtle gesture was attuned to the music. The man at the central table leaned slightly forward, his hands resting lightly on the table, and his eyes reflected an intensity that was calm but fully engaged. She allowed the music to flow completely, pouring emotion into each note, letting the melody carry the story of her past, of dreams set aside, of hope rediscovered. The intensity built gradually, not forced, but natural, like a wave cresting and preparing to fall. Her fingers danced over the keys, blending speed with emotion, precision with vulnerability, and then, as if the song had reached the perfect height, she allowed a pause, a single, suspended moment of silence. The resonance lingered, leaving a profound stillness that seemed to stretch across the room, It was a quiet, heavy moment filled with anticipation, where every listener felt the weight of what had been shared. She resumed, slower now, letting the final section of the piece unfold with gentle grace. The melody softened, carrying reflection and closure, a sense of completeness without grandiose flourishes. The notes echoed, fading naturally, leaving the air filled with subtle reverberation, like a gentle sigh. The silence after the final note was profound. It was not empty. It was charged, filled with emotion and recognition. Diners blinked. Some reached instinctively for hands to hold. Others simply sat still, caught in the beauty and honesty of what they had just experienced. The restaurant seemed suspended in time, the moment stretching beyond its normal limits, holding everyone in a shared awareness. Slowly, applause began, hesitant at first, quiet and careful, as if the audience needed time to process the intensity of what had been played. Then it grew, spreading like warmth through the room, heartfelt and genuine. Diners smiled, some with tears in their eyes, some simply nodding in admiration, and the child clapped with innocent enthusiasm. The staff, too, joined in, offering appreciation for the rare talent and courage displayed before them. The waitress lowered her hands, her chest heaving slightly with exertion and emotion. A quiet, humble smile touched her lips. She had shared a piece of herself, raw and authentic, and the response had been overwhelming, yet respectful. The man at the central table stood, nodding in acknowledgement, his smile now wide. Filled with quiet admiration and deep appreciation, he gestured subtly to his companions, speaking softly, and all eyes were drawn toward her. She felt a warmth spread through her, a mix of pride and humility, the satisfaction of having taken a risk and embraced her true self. The restaurant had been transformed not by grandeur, but by honesty, talent, and the courage to share something intimate. Returning to her station, she moved with a new sense of confidence. Her steps were lighter, her smile more natural, and her awareness of the space around her was heightened. The piano no longer seemed merely an object. It was a companion, a witness to her abilities, and a symbol of the path she had been hesitant to return to. The man at the central table continued to watch her with subtle curiosity, but now it was mingled with respect and quiet acknowledgement of the courage she had displayed. She could sense the unspoken question in his gaze. What comes next? But she did not answer in words. Her music had already spoken. The resonance of it lingered in the hearts of everyone present. The rest of the evening unfolded, but the energy had shifted. The music had left an imprint, a memory that would stay with the diners long after they left. The waitress moved among the tables with grace, attentive to her duties, yet carrying within her the knowledge that she had reclaimed a vital part of herself. She glanced at the piano once more, feeling anticipation and quiet excitement. She knew this moment was not the end, but a beginning. The song had left the room speechless. Yes, but more importantly, it had reminded her of her own strength, her talent, and the possibilities that lay ahead. The night had transformed from ordinary to extraordinary, and within her, a spark had been reignited. Ready to illuminate the path forward, the room remained quiet for a few moments after the final notes of her song faded. The audience was still, almost as if the world had stopped, caught in the lingering presence of the music. The waitress lowered her hands slowly from the keys, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of her pulse. The piano seemed to hum quietly, holding the resonance of the emotions she had poured into it. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to smile. A subtle, quiet acknowledgement of what had just happened. Applause broke out, gradually at first, then growing steadily as the diners absorbed the impact of what they had witnessed. Some clapped quietly, unsure of how to express their feelings, while others clapped with warmth and appreciation. A few eyes glistened with tears, moved by the sincerity and emotional depth of the performance. She remained standing at the piano for a moment, letting the room react, letting herself take in the energy that flowed back to her. The man at the central table stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He gestured for his companions to rise as well, and all three approached the piano with respectful curiosity. His eyes met hers, and there was no judgment there, only recognition and admiration. She could feel the weight of his gaze, not in a threatening or demanding way, but in a way that acknowledged her talent and the courage it had taken to reveal it. "Your music," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "It's extraordinary." She nodded humbly, unsure if words were enough to express what she had felt during the performance. The music had been her language, a way to speak without speaking, to share a piece of herself in a way words never could. Now, she realized that the connection she had felt while playing had reached out to every person in the room. He continued, his tone thoughtful. "It's rare to see someone with such skill and honesty, and even rarer to see it performed with such courage." She felt a warmth spread through her, a mix of pride and humility. The performance had been personal, intimate, and yet it had resonated beyond her own expectations. She allowed herself a small smile, the kind that reached her eyes, acknowledging both the compliment and the shared experience. "You should not hide this talent," he said. "It's something the world deserves to hear, and you deserve to share it." She blinked, absorbing the words. The thought had never been far from her mind, yet life had kept her on a different path, one of practicality and routine. Music had been tucked away, reserved for quiet moments and private reflection. Now, someone was offering validation, recognition, and a possibility she had not considered in years. "I'm not sure," she replied softly. "It's been so long, and I never imagined doing this beyond here." He nodded, understanding. "I understand. But talent like yours shouldn't remain hidden forever. Sometimes one moment, one chance, is enough to start something new." The restaurant had settled back into a quiet rhythm, though the energy lingered, a gentle buzz of emotion and admiration. The diners returned to their meals or conversation, but the impact of the performance remained. She noticed small smiles, soft whispers, and the occasional glance back toward the piano. It was clear that the experience had touched them, even if only briefly. The man extended his hand slightly, not in demand, but in a gesture of connection. "I would like to speak with you if you're willing. Not about charity or favors, but about opportunity and the potential you carry." She hesitated for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Opportunity was not something she had expected, not in this place, not at this moment. And yet there was a part of her that recognized it as a door opening, a chance to embrace something she had long set aside. She nodded,